Well, the verdict in the court of public opinion is in, and it is not good for Donald Trump. 59%, quote, disapprove of the way Donald Trump is handling investigations into Jeffrey Epstein. Just 20% approve. Donald Trump is the first and only president in American history who had a long-term friendship with a man who raped children regularly, almost every day, while that man was Donald Trump's closest friend, according to that man. That's what Jeffrey Epstein, the child rapist and sex trafficker, told Michael Wolff in a tape-recorded interview. Quote, I was Donald's closest friend for 10 years. Everything Donald Trump does now is an attempt to get 59% of Americans to look the other way. Donald Trump is trying to get 59% of Americans to stop thinking about his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein and what Donald Trump might be trying to hide in the Epstein files that are in possession of Donald Trump's attorney general, who actually went to the Oval Office with Donald Trump's former criminal defense lawyer, who is now the deputy attorney general, to personally tell Donald Trump exactly how many times his name appears in the Epstein files and what the Epstein files actually say about Donald Trump. The Epstein files are the full Justice Department investigative file on Jeffrey Epstein and his co-conspirator, Ghislaine Maxwell. And during the presidential campaign, Donald Trump told his followers that he would make the Epstein files public. Donald Trump's current FBI director publicly insisted before he became FBI director that the Epstein files must be made public completely, every word of it. Donald Trump's attorney general promised to make the Epstein files public while she was attorney general, saying on TV that she had the Epstein files right there on her desk and was ready to make them public. She said that she had Jeffrey Epstein's client list on her desk and was ready to make that list public. And then she issued an unsigned public statement saying there is no client list and not one word of the Epstein files will ever be made public by Donald Trump's Justice Department. And so it's not surprising tonight that 71% of Americans think Donald Trump knew some or a lot about the sex crimes committed by Jeffrey Epstein against children before the investigations of Jeffrey Epstein's criminal conduct even began. Only 8% of Americans think Donald Trump knew nothing about the sex crimes Jeffrey Epstein was committing against children. 56% of Republicans think Donald Trump knew some or a lot about the sex crimes committed by Jeffrey Epstein. Think about how important this story is to Donald Trump's presidency. Donald Trump knows how important it is. And he knows how important it is to Donald Trump's political power and his ability to retain political power. Republicans in Congress have never been afraid of Donald Trump. They know he's a clown who knows nothing. They know he's a child prone to uncontrollable temper tantrums. They know he doesn't belong in the White House. They know he doesn't belong anywhere in government. They have never been afraid of Donald Trump, but Republican politicians have been very afraid since Donald Trump won the Republican nomination for president in 2016. That is when every Republican politician began living in abject fear of not Donald Trump, but Trump voters. Donald Trump is nothing without Trump voters. Without Trump voters, Donald Trump would have been the first candidate to drop out of the 2016 presidential campaign. Donald Trump's first presidential campaign began so badly that the billionaire owner-operator of the Fox propaganda channel, Rupert Murdoch, publicly urged Donald Trump to drop out of the race and stop embarrassing his family. Rupert Murdoch didn't know, none of us knew, that the clownish candidacy of Donald Trump was going to win over Republican voters. It is Donald Trump's power over Republican voters that gives him power. Donald Trump's power is completely dependent on support from Republican voters, and nothing has separated Donald Trump from his voters more than the man who has risen from the dead to remind us, I was Donald's closest friend for 10 years. Jeffrey Epstein. The sex crimes of Jeffrey Epstein, the children raped by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell have separated 56% of Republicans from Donald Trump, who think Donald Trump knew some or a lot about the sex crimes committed by Jeffrey Epstein. Those voters will never see Donald Trump's name on a ballot again, and so they will never be tested in a voting booth looking at Donald Trump's name versus an opposing candidate. But Republicans in the House and the Senate have always been devoted to Donald Trump because they believed that their voters could never be separated from Donald Trump. They believed their voters would always vote for Donald Trump. But tonight, Republicans in Congress, Republicans everywhere, know that 56% of Republicans think that Donald Trump knew some or a lot about the sex crimes committed by Jeffrey Epstein. And the reason that 56% of Republicans think that is because the American news media has refused to turn away from Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell and their friend Donald Trump. This program has refused to turn away from the crimes Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell committed against children while they were partying with Donald Trump, while they were friends with Donald Trump, while Jeffrey Epstein was saying, I was Donald's closest friend for 10 years. The Wall Street Journal reported on a birthday book presented to Jeffrey Epstein on his 50th birthday with letters from his friends collected by Ghislaine Maxwell, including a letter bearing Donald Trump's name. And Donald Trump was so terrified of that news report that he threatened Rupert Murdoch, the owner of the Wall Street Journal, that he would sue Rupert Murdoch and sue the Wall Street Journal if they published that report. And Rupert Murdoch looked at the evidence that his reporters had, and he published that story. And Donald Trump then filed his phony lawsuit against Rupert Murdoch, which Donald Trump will never pursue because that lawsuit enables Rupert Murdoch to put Donald Trump under oath in a deposition and force Donald Trump to answer questions under oath about whether he knew some or a lot about the sex crimes committed by Jeffrey Epstein against children. 71% of Americans think Donald Trump knew some or a lot about the sex crimes committed by Jeffrey Epstein against children before the investigations into Jeffrey Epstein even began. We've had 45 presidents of the United States, and only one of them was friends with a rapist of children who claimed to be that president's best friend for 10 years. And so Donald Trump is trying a new distraction game this week, which he will continue to play in cities around the country. And that is sending in completely ineffectual, small numbers, just a couple of hundred at any one time on the streets, of National Guard troops into Washington, D.C., where they are, as we predicted here, doing absolutely nothing. The New York Times was there last night at the Washington Monument at sunset, one of the tourist meccas of Washington, D.C., where all the parents and children in short pants feel safe. The Times reports about a dozen members of the National Guard appeared in 5 military vehicles near the Washington Monument as the sun set. A stark juxtaposition to a peaceful evening scene of people jogging by with headphones and walking their dogs, with troops snapping photos of themselves with visitors. They left roughly 2 hours after they arrived. The National Guard troops are all there because of Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell, and Donald Trump's friendship. Here's what Congressman Jamie Raskin, our first guest tonight, posted on social media.
Hey, everybody. The whole country knows what a real emergency looks like in Washington, D.C. That's January 6, 2021, when thousands of mob insurrectionists and violent cop-beating criminals attacked Congress at the instigation of Donald Trump and endangered the vice president and injured more than 140 officers there. Donald Trump did nothing on that day. He didn't send out the National Guard, but that was a real emergency, and he sat on his hands. What's going on in D.C. today is the lowest crime in 30 years. Donald Trump's talking about the graffiti and the crime out of control without looking at all at the actual statistics. In any event, if he cared about public safety in D.C., he would release the $1 billion he's confiscated and impounded and tell the Republicans to release that money to the people of D.C. who want to spend it on public safety and law enforcement and public schools and so on. This isn't an emergency. This is just a public relations crisis because the president is hiding the Epstein file despite the fact that he campaigned on releasing it. So release the Epstein file and let the people in Washington, D.C. govern themselves.
Congressman Raskin has sent a letter co-signed by Democratic members of the House Judiciary Committee to Donald Trump's Attorney General and to Donald Trump's Director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons about their decision to transfer Donald Trump's old friend, Ghislaine Maxwell, to what has been called one of the best jails in America to serve time. Congressman Raskin's letter suggests that the prison transfer was done, quote, to shield the president. Congressman Raskin's letter says, 2 weeks ago, you inexplicably transferred Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirator, from a federal correctional institution to a far preferable and relatively luxurious minimum security prison camp in Texas just 3 years into her 20-year sentence for sexually exploiting and abusing minor girls as young as 14. The transfer follows Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche's private interviews of Ms. Maxwell, arranged after a firestorm of media attention about the Department of Justice's refusal to release the full Epstein files as originally demanded by President Donald Trump. These actions raise substantial concerns that the administration may now be attempting to tamper with a crucial witness, conceal President Trump's relationship with convicted sex offenders, and coax Ms. Maxwell into providing false or misleading testimony in order to protect the president. The Trump administration has engaged in a series of actions that create the strong appearance that it is attempting to cover up the full extent of the relationship between President Trump and Mr. Epstein. 71% of Americans think Donald Trump knew some or a lot about the sex crimes committed by Jeffrey Epstein against children before the investigations into Jeffrey Epstein even began. Congressman Raskin's letter continues. During President Trump's first administration, federal prosecutors charged Ms. Maxwell with perjury, stating her willingness to brazenly lie under oath about her conduct strongly suggests her true motive has been and remains to avoid being held accountable for her crimes. The letter says this about Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, whose last job was Donald Trump's personal criminal defense lawyer. Quote, his actions raise staggering concerns about political conflicts of interest, witness tampering, and suborning of false testimony. And so has come to this in America. The top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, well-versed in the law, a former law professor himself, suggests the possibility that Donald Trump's Deputy Attorney General, his former criminal defense lawyer, may have committed the federal crimes of, quote, witness tampering and suborning of false testimony. Congressman Raskin's letter says, less than a week after Mr. Blanche's meeting with Ms. Maxwell, Bureau of Prisons transferred her from a federal correctional institution in Tallahassee, Florida, to an all-woman minimum security prison camp in Bryan, Texas, which is listed as one of the best jails in America to serve time. The women incarcerated there, a population which includes a number of white-collar and celebrity inmates, reportedly enjoy a ton of freedom to interact with one another and have access to educational and social programs unavailable at higher security federal correctional institutions like the one Ms. Maxwell was committed to in Tallahassee. The transfer of Ms. Maxwell to a lower security and more comfortable facility heightens the appearance that the Trump administration is seeking to coax favorable testimony or strategic silence from Ms. Maxwell. The letter points out there is a months-long wait list for openings at the camp where Ghislaine Maxwell now resides. Quote, Ms. Maxwell, however, appears to have short-circuited the entire review process and jumped to the queue, receiving a place in federal prison camp Bryan within a matter of days. Congressman Raskin's letter quotes one of Ghislaine Maxwell's and Jeffrey Epstein's victims, Virginia Giuffre, saying that Ghislaine Maxwell, quote, is a monster. She's worse than Epstein. She did things even worse than Epstein did. She was vicious. She was evil. On the last page of his letter, Congressman Raskin writes, the committee must have access to all documents and information regarding these actions to assess whether the Department of Justice officials and the president have abused prosecutorial and law enforcement resources to shield the president and mislead the public.